Hello, Austin, Texas. My name is Adam Sparks, and I am with AISD for All. We are a grassroots effort of Austinites working to make sure that AISD provides an excellent education for each and every student in Austin. Today, we are continuing our video series where we try and bring topics from the world of AISD into general conversation within Austin. And I'm very excited to have speaking with someone who's had 40 years experience studying and speaking about AISD, Roxanne Evans. Roxanne, if you would please introduce yourself for us.
Thank you, Adam. Good afternoon. Roxanne Evans, a longtime Austin resident and a mother of 4 AISD graduates. And I'm currently involved in a number of grassroots education organizations that support public education. So I'm very pleased to be talking with you today. And when it comes to the education of Black students in Austin, we all know Brown v. Board in 1954 said that schools needed to be desegregated. Now, Texas was very slow in responding to that federal law. AISD was equally as slow. So when people ask me to kind of contrast the education of Black students 50 years ago versus today, it's not as big a change as one would hope would have taken place. Desegregation was very slow in Austin. It began with the painful closing of some schools. There were staff who were moved from school to integrate the schools. There was one-way busing, there was two-way busing. There were a number of ways that the district and the community tried to respond to the federal law, but none of them were fully successful, or the ones that seemed to be gaining traction did not last long enough to have a long and permanent impression and improvement on student performance of Black students in Austin.
For someone who is new to this history, I find time and time again it's Black students who are asked to sacrifice. So in 1970, when the ruling came in that Austin needed to desegregate, my understanding is the first plan was to have white students go to Anderson High School, which was the traditional Black school of Austin. I think it was something like 600 students were assigned there for the beginning of the school year, and 40 showed up on the first day. By day 3, 0 showed up. And so it was then decided that that plan failed, and the alternative was to close the traditional Black high school and junior high in East Austin and send those kids on buses across town in order to make segregation happen. Can you speak to how the closing of Austin's traditionally Black high school and junior high in 1971 affected the Black community of Austin?
Certainly, certainly. Although I wasn't here, I have seen up close and personal from relationships with people and from studying history that it was a wrenching decision for the African American community in Austin. The original L.C. Anderson High School was a very high-performing school. There was a lot of pride. The community had a lot of pride in that school. Not only did the students excel academically, they won a number of statewide competitions in debate, single act plays, music, and their athletic teams were just amazing. And they had a couple players go on to play in the NFL. And their marching band was also a tremendous source of pride for the community. Their marching band was one of the few Black bands that was invited to participate in one of the gubernatorial inaugurations. So the Anderson High School was an institution in the community, and closing it was very painful. And that pain is still felt to this day. People still sense the displacement. When the schools were closed, teachers were scattered all over the district. Businesses that supported the school, little restaurants and shops near the school were also forced to close. So it left a deep and gaping hole in the community that still to this day is still a source of pain and anger and disappointment for many people in the African American community.
Um, let's just talk briefly for someone who, the goal back in 1970 in AISD was to end segregated schools. That goal has not been achieved in 2020. Uh, why is that? Why for 50 years with many efforts, with closures, with busings, am I correct in saying that AISD is still nearly as segregated as it was then, and why has that not been able to be changed?
Well, there's a couple ways to explain why AISD has not fully desegregated its schools. The first one I alluded to earlier when I said it basically was a federal law. If left to their own devices, Austin probably wouldn't have made any attempt to desegregate schools, but it was the law of the land. The other reason why it hasn't been successful is that Austin is a very segregated community in terms of housing. So, for example, when crosstown busing was ended in the 1980s and students went back to their neighborhood schools, the Black and brown students who went back to Black and brown neighborhoods were in single race schools. They went to school with each other. So, because there was no simultaneous effort to desegregate neighborhoods or to change housing patterns, even if AISD had approached attempting to integrate schools wholeheartedly and robustly, which they did not do, it would have been very difficult to accomplish with the housing patterns we have in Austin.
Can you speak a little bit about busing? Because you were an Austin American Statesman reporter during the busing years. My understanding is that at first, African American students were forced to bus from their communities to primarily west, but then eventually the entire school district was involved in crosstown busing. How, if I have that right, how was that perceived? How was that taken by the community, and what was its effect?
It was very mixed in terms of how it worked and who it worked for. One of the things it did, the students who were bused from West Austin to East Austin schools, for example, many of those schools, such as Blackshear, saw an increase in resources for the school, an increase in parental interest and involvement. The district tended to pay more attention to the schools east when white students were there. The brunt of the burden of busing was primarily, though, on African American students. I had a former trustee challenge me to ride a bus from East Austin to where Black students were bused to Sunset Valley. Those little children were in the dark, early in the morning, having a very long bus drive. You know, certainly not what it would be today with traffic, but it was still a very long bus drive for elementary students to go all the way to Sunset Valley. But the really tragic part at the time, the reason she challenged me is because she said that students were bused from their predominantly Black neighborhoods to classrooms that were also predominantly Black. And I found that really hard to believe. But when I got off the bus with the students and I saw that they were, many of the students were placed in classrooms for special ed students and for other categories where the classes were predominantly African American. And that story is what helped me inform the community about taking a look at the district's desegregation efforts and maybe looking at some other ways. In retrospect, it's really kind of unfortunate that there weren't some other alternatives, because returning students to neighborhood schools is why we are where we're at today. Schools that are identified by race, easily identified by race, and by class and by income. And many of those students who weren't succeeding many, many years ago still aren't getting the quality of education they deserve. And our whole community suffers as a result.
I want to touch on the 2019 school closures plan, which AISD came forth with a plan to close 12 schools. They eventually settled on closing 4 schools. During the vote at the AISD School Board Trustees, AISD had recently added a chief equity officer. And the chief equity officer spoke out against the school closure plan, saying that if you looked at the map of where the school is to be closed, where it's a map of what 21st century racism looks like. Has Austin learned its lesson from school closures? Do you think that this recent school closure plan was simply perpetuating the errors of the past?
It definitely was perpetuating the errors of the past, because when schools were, when crosstown busing was ended in 1987, it created 16 one-race schools. And that list of 12 schools is almost identical to the original schools that were resegregated when busing was ended. So, you know, looking back, you could almost see the handwriting on the wall then. You know, those are the schools that are, you know, less well-funded. Their, you know, enrollment is going down for a number of reasons. So certainly those are the same schools that become targets for closure. I would like to think that the district had learned from its lesson, and I think now with the pandemic situation that we're in, I'm hoping that it gives the district and maybe the trustees pause on, you know, moving forward with things when the community has already suffered enough trauma, both from COVID-19 as well as the closures. This is a time the community needs to come together rather than be more fractured. So I'm hoping that the district will take this time and be a little more reflective.
Looking to the future, what can AISD do to increase support for Black students?
Well, the first thing AISD has to do, and that this goes for the board and the administration, they have to come to the conclusion that all students can learn and all students can be successful. One of the things that has disturbed me in the past is the expectations for students aren't all the same. With the right kind of instruction and support, there's no reason that any student in the district can't succeed. Someone's color and zip code should not condemn them to, you know, a certain class or type of education. And so the district has to come to grips with that and look at policies, practices, maybe the student report cards that they develop internally for educating students, and make sure that they have the same high academic standards and that they have the same quality of teaching for all students all over the town. That's one of the big things that the district could do. And another thing that the district could do, the district, because Austin has went through such a high period of growth. Austin, AISD is a very large school district. Some people might say it's probably too big because it varies so much from, you know, one part of town to the other, from neighborhood to the other. And I'm not convinced that all of the trustees really know the district well. So I know a couple of trustees have gone out of their area and out of their way to visit schools that they aren't directly responsible for, and it's been a good learning experience. And I think getting the trustees out to all neighborhoods to see all of the schools, I think would be very educational for them. And if they're all about education, they should get out there and learn as much as they can about all the communities that they claim they want to serve.
Well, Roxanne Evans, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today and for your over 40 years working in the Austin educational community.
Thank you, Adam, for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
If you are interested in seeing more videos like this or learning more about how you can ensure that AISD is for all, please go to AISDforall.org. That's AISD, the word for spelled out, all.org. Thank you so much.